And just want to welcome everyone to our annual, you want to call it that, membership meeting of the AFT Adjunct Contingent Faculty Caucus. Our caucus began, our first meeting was back in on July 12th, 2014 in Los Angeles. We, in Baltimore at the Higher Ed Conference in April of 2014, we put plans together for leadership and for our first meeting. Caucus was officially approved by AFT in May of 2014. So we are 7 years in existence as of 10 days ago. We're higher ed, we're contingent adjunct faculty. AFT has approximately 1.7 million members. Higher ed makes up about very small amount, 230,000 from the last figures that I was given. Of those 230,000, we basically represent our caucus about 130,000 of them. That's about 90,000 adjunct contingent faculty and approximately 40,000 full-time non-tenure track graduate students and other contingent faculty in the country. 1/2 of this number approximately are in community colleges, and 94% are in the public sector. This is who we represent. I just want to take a minute to acknowledge our current officers. Many of them are here. If you can put your camera on when I introduce you, it would be nice. So most of you know me, I'm Bill Lipkin. I am currently the Vice President of the caucus. I am Secretary Treasurer of United Adjunct Faculty of New Jersey, where we represent 11 of the community colleges. We have as our secretary, I saw her here a minute ago, down on the bottom, Jory Siegel from West Valley Mission Colleges in California. She is the secretary of the caucus. Wave so that those that can see you. Jory, you want to wave? You're not going to be able to unmute yourself, just wave. Good. Then we have our treasurer, Leonard Winogara. Leonard is part of United Adjunct Faculty. He represents Mercer College in New Jersey. We have Aimee Schoenberg from San Diego, who is our organizing officer. Arnie, if you want to put your camera on, wave. We have Linda Sneed. Also, she's from the Los Rios College District in California. She's our communications officer. We have Arnie Karotkin, who I don't believe is able to make it. He's from Montclair State in New Jersey. He is our member at large for 4-year colleges. We have John Gofsky. I don't see him on here. Let me just see if he's in here. Not yet. John, also from California, is our member at large for 2-year colleges. We have David Albert. David, I saw you before. David is from Austin Community College in Texas. He is our member at large for our new title. He was from Right to Work states, but since most of us are right now anyway. So he is our member at large for Central United States. We have Nancy Merrill. Nancy, wave. Nancy, also from United Adjunct Faculty of New Jersey, representing Middlesex and Union County Colleges, is our member at large for the eastern half of the country. And Grace Chi. Grace, where'd you go? Grace, from the Los Angeles Community College District, is our member at large for the western half of the United States. And I just want to put a wave out to Scott Douglas. Scott, I saw him on here. There he is. Scott was our membership. He's from Palomar College in California, was our membership officer. He has just stepped down from that position, and we want to thank him for all the work he did, especially with me on a couple of committees. Great job. And that leaves one person I haven't mentioned, and that's the gentleman who has served for the past 3 years as our esteemed president, also from California, and that is Geoff Johnson. And I will turn this over to Geoff right now.
Thank you very much, Bill, and thank you to the members of the caucus, and thank you to the attendees here today. First of all, I'd like to thank all of you as activists and just as teachers, as educators, as human beings for your tireless work. And a special shout out to those of you that are parents and givers that have been negotiating what has been an unprecedented crisis as a result of the COVID epidemic. It's important that we turn around and acknowledge that. I just want you to understand that probably less than 20 minutes before I got on here, I was basically reading an email at Southwestern College. Our president there, basically without consulting us at the time, made a decision that they were going to allow students who didn't have the vaccine on campus. Whereupon I was getting a concerned email from a faculty member who had 2 classes scheduled on campus that were originally online, then switched face to face. And he was saying to me, Geoff, I've had quadruple bypass surgery and I've had pneumonia and I'm scared. And, you know, one of the things we have to say, and I just have to acknowledge right off at the bat, this has been a especially tough year for adjunct contingent faculty. And as the president, not only of the caucus, but as a representative, both at Southwestern Community College and at San Diego Mesa College, in addition to being involved in a number of other adjunct positions, this is stuff that I've been dealing with pretty much on a daily basis, whether employment, whether it's adjuncts that have stopped working and have sometimes ended up in the hospital, simply depression. Notwithstanding COVID crisis itself, it's been a great concern. Right now in California, we're looking at a potential, well, as I reported in the California part-timer last spring, we were seeing an 11% reduction in enrollment. And it's likely that much of that may carry through here to the fall as well. And so, you know, the reason I'm bringing this up at the front is, as some of you may have seen, one of the things that the caucus is very much trying to work on is a campaign to push for the Department of Labor to change its reasonable assurance language so that our adjunct contingent faculty can get unemployment insurance, because we are walking into a dark fall. And it's really critical. I'm asking you to reach out and have these faculty send in testimonials. Alyssa can speak to this later, but she spoke about how some of the testimonials we passed on already are actually going to be taken to the White House. You know, we're really wanting to work and make something happen, and that's what the caucus is in a sense about. I want to go on here, and I know we don't have a lot of time, and what I'm going to apologize to everybody up front, because we have guests coming in on set timelines, we're going to be limited in terms of Q&A discussion. Certainly we'll have some opportunity with some of the later presentations, but a lot of that discussion may have to come for a little bit later in the agenda. And so I ask your patience in dealing with that. We just got to try to get people through, and we have some people that are going to be coming in on tight schedules. Just so everybody understands, the Adjunct Contingent Caucus is a caucus that is an issues-based caucus that works with AFT. We are, in fact, we're not an internal political process or caucus. And in the process of doing that, one of our main goals is primarily to get AFT to prioritize and put resources towards dealing with and addressing the issues of adjunct contingent faculty. And at the same time, one of the things that I wanted to mention, and this is something that's going to be talked about in our bylaws, we also are not just reaching out to simply what are the traditionally known as adjunct contingent faculty, but also to graduate student workers as well, and graduate students who are also facing these issues of contingency. And I just wanted to go ahead and mention that very quickly. The thing I do want to stress, and some of you might be a little bit sad to hear this, but We're also not in the process of, and we're not saying that there isn't at times inappropriate or bad behavior that goes on in other locals, but we're not in the situation of sanctioning locals. We're not here to referee what a local does. And I would recommend that if you have those issues, you take those issues up with your state federations or state labor boards. There's a process to do that. But what we try to concentrate on is working with AFT to sort of address these processes. And we're not address these processes, but to basically work on adjunct contingent issues. So I want to speak a little bit to our activities and accomplishments. One of the things I want to stress is that we are a national caucus. And to a certain extent, there's a dominance in the caucus board, particularly with regard to, you know, the East Coast and the West Coast. But we really, really want to be a national caucus. This is one of the reasons why I'm very happy to have people on board from places like Michigan, and also people on board from places like Texas, and having Dave Albert speak, because one of the things we have to understand is, you know, we're dealing with a very diverse group of individuals, but also dealing with a very diverse set of labor circumstances. Some of you may not know that there are 24 states which do not allow public higher ed workers to collectively bargain. We've got to work on that. Some of you may also not know that this week is basically a week for pushing the PRO Act, which is probably some of the most significant legislation being put forth since the Taft-Hartley Act. This legislation would be also very helpful for us in terms of trying to get particularly private colleges, private institutions of higher learning to actually have the ability to collectively bargain. And so I just mentioned that, be looking for that. But moving along here, what I wanted to say is that one of the things we're concerned about is doing things like getting data. One of our projects has been to identify within the various locals of AFT Higher Ed, which of those locals actually represent adjunct contingent faculty. So far, we've managed to put together a list of 160 some locals, which we actually have on our website. And what we're hoping to do is that, and we'd certainly say ask for you guys look through the list. If you know of other locals, we don't have the list, please let us know, because we want to get that large list, because we want to be able to reach out to all of our constituency. One of the things that we became involved with in terms of getting the data is the 2019 Contingent Faculty Survey. In fact, it was the Adjunct Contingent Caucus that submitted the initial draft of that survey. That survey then turned around and became the first national adjunct survey of its nature since 2013. And then it in turn led to AFT's creation of the Army of Temps report. That survey was then taken up again in 2020, and later on, towards the end of my discussion, I'm going to be turning this over to Bobbi-Lee Smart, a fellow caucus member who actually came on and has written up some of the results of that. And Bobbi-Lee, thank you very much. You're a superstar. I just wanted to go ahead. The other thing that trying to work on is things like gathering contract data. And this is the thing that I'm encouraging people in their respective states and respective federations to do. One of the things that I've been working on is going through the contracts for the 72 districts within the California community college system alone, and trying to look at things like step and column comparisons, looking at things like rehired rights language, offage language. And a lot of times this is important in terms of affecting how we can shape future legislation. One of the things we want to emphasize is putting an idea on increasing communications. We created a new website. We have an active Facebook page. And one of the things that I'm going to say to you is, if you have a contract campaign going on, if there's a particular legislative issue that you're pushing, please let us know. We want to popularize, we want to get the information out. If you have letters that you're trying to push for support on these things, this is what we want to do. We want to create a nexus so that we can provide mutual support for groups, because that's what makes us stronger. In addition, we want to work on working within state federations on things like resolutions. Some of you may remember last year at the National Convention, we got past basically a resolution calling for the right to shared governance. This was of significance to our UC AFT faculty because as it was listed, if they were not given the opportunity, their connection to shared governance, they could be potentially thrown out of the bargaining unit, which means that a bargaining unit could actually cease to exist. All right, this was significant legislation, not only in that regard, but it also tied into the work that has been done by people on my CFT committee, like Grace Chi, who has been a long-standing strong proponent for shared governments, not only in addition to that, but also fighting for adjunct healthcare. And so, you know, what we did here is we managed to bring together two inter-system. We had the community colleges and the UCs actually come together to put forth legislation. And this is the kind of thing that we really need to start seeing. The systems need to start working together. Working together, we can get not only the resolutions, but we can get resources. The other thing that we can do is we can put forth legislation, because that's in fact what ultimately happened. The passage of that resolution did lead to legislation in the state of California, which is presently trying to secure the right to shared governance from our UC AFT employees. The other thing that I want to, and this is something Bill Lipkin's going to be talking about, New Jersey scored a great coup last year with basically the achievement of unemployment benefits for its adjunct contingent faculty. And my understanding is that it was more than a decade struggle to make that happen. So congratulations. This was the work that was led by many people who were in fact involved with the caucus. You know, and one of the things that I'm saying is that we want to press for the, more prioritization of adjunct contingent issues within higher AFT higher ed. We'd like to see, more involvement. And certainly I participated in a great activity along with Thomas Mumchi here, an adjunct faculty mobilization, which took place up at Evergreen College the summer before last. And I would say that it was one of the best organizing activities that I've ever been to. Plus, it was a great opportunity for people to share and talk about adjunct contingent conditions. I've talked with Alyssa about this, but one of the things we want to work on is creating the idea of webinars based on adjunct and contingent specific issues. But I am going to say this, and this is something that I think a lot of us as adjunct activists are not aware of, that there are real challenges that exist with our staff. I talk frequently with CFT staff, and I've talked to some staff in AFT National about this. Their numbers are down. And when the numbers are down, the kind of work and research that needs to get done gets very hard because it's lined up. So if I can put this out, and Alyssa, you can hear this, and I would also direct this to Ed Muir as well. One of the things that I would think would be great is if we could see about getting more funds dedicated to staff. And that, also I think it's important that staff be, properly remunerated and treated with the same sort of respect that, adjunct contingent faculty are fighting for. And I just want to acknowledge that a lot of you are unaware of just how much work a lot of people are taking on, particularly because of staff reductions recently. And so I'm just throwing that out, and I'm not trying to sit there and try to make an argument for AFT itself about maybe a dues increase. But if we need to get the resources to do the right thing for our people, that's something that we may have to consider. I did want to go down here and talk a little bit about the other thing that I think is important is that we share on campaigns. And I think I've mentioned that already. The other thing that I'm trying to do right now is work on reaching out and basically engaging in trans-union activity. Some of you may know that I'm actually a member of the NEA. I'm actually an adjunct rep, and I sit on the part-time faculty issues committee for the California Community College Association. In addition to that, I'm also involved with NEA Higher Ed, or NECHI. And one of the things that I'm trying to do is I'm trying to reach across to create a bonded connection. And I think this is important. I know in particular, I've been having some inroads into Illinois. and finding that there's great opportunity for basically these two groups to work together, just as we're trying to get these two work groups to work together within the California Community College system. Today, in fact, one of the things we're going to be hearing about is a group called the Scholars New Deal in Higher Education. And we'll be hearing from a woman by the name of Aimee Lousell. It was a tremendous effort that these people put together, some 60 unions, or basically union locals from some 10 different national unions affiliates, basically some 250 instructors and the whatnot, getting together and within 2 days putting together a very dynamic and aggressive and aspirational program. Okay, so now I did want to talk about the environment, climate, but I think I've kind of covered some of the stuff already. COVID has decimated enrollment, particularly in community college and in higher ed. Okay, and we have to look out for our own here on this. The other thing that I think that we need to be thinking about here is that we need to carry this issue through in our fall organizing campaigns. And I'll be speaking towards the end of the meeting about an activity which has been in the past called Campus Equity Week. And I say, I do Campus Equity Week, but other people may have different ideas of what they want to do in organization. We can talk about that. And I want to talk about this at the end here in terms of what I think is also important for the caucus to do. And one of those things is it's great for us to have aspirational goals. It's great for us to set. And if I wanted to talk about my own aspirations, I would like to see a day in which the conditions of contingency basically would go away. And effectively, a professor would be a professor. And that professor could be somebody who might be working full-time. It might be somebody working part-time by choice. And that person would be paid equal on a proportional rate. That person would have an equal or proportional opportunity to participate in shared governance, to have the same opportunity for health benefits, all right? Have the same opportunity for professional respect, all right? And make no doubt about it, even if we were to reach that, the struggles that basically take place are continuing and ongoing. But I also want to let you know this. I'll just give as an example. In California, we had a bill recently put forth called AB 1269. The bill had basically 4 components. One, it wanted us to do research on basically pay conditions between adjunct and tenure line faculty. It wanted to look at, benefits. It wanted to look at shared governance. It wanted to look at a number of these issues. Then they wanted to talk about stakeholders coming together and trying to come up with a notion of what parity should be. Okay. After that, there was the idea of a proposal of a path to parity and ultimately the achievement and the funding of that. Okay. Probably an extremely ambitious bill that was going to be put forward. We obviously expected resistance, but what I didn't expect was that the chancellor for the community college system would, through his office, would issue a letter where he wouldn't even want us to engage or have the chancellor's office engage into research of the issue. All right. And just so you know, this gentleman, and I will say his name, Ortiz Oakley, has just been chosen by the Secretary of Labor for the United States of America as basically a consultant on the issue of higher ed. So, yeah, and I think that should give you pause. And I'm trying to put that into a situation because I want people to understand this. We have a tough road ahead of us. That doesn't mean we back away, we don't turn down. But I have to stress this. When people make gains, we need to celebrate them. All right, we don't need to dismiss them. I've known people who worked for 10 years to get a contract where they would simply get a pay equity rate of 65%. All right, and that may not seem like a great accomplishment to some of you, but for them, it was the world. All right. Sometimes even just having a collective bargaining unit. We honor each other's work. We don't trash each other's work. We don't belittle each other's work. Doing that is what achieves solidarity. And we're going to need a lot of solidarity to move forward. The other thing, and I have to stress this, is that we have to look at where we're at. We are dealing with students, okay? When we did Campus Equity Week activities, where we led into legislative campaigns to push and actually get changes, 90% of the letters that we got, 90% of that support that went on to Sacramento was from students, all right? Students can be our ally, just as can be classified staff, just as can be the larger labor community. And we need to keep that in mind going forward. Now, with that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Bobbi-Lee because I'm looking forward to hearing the results. Bobbi-Lee? Yeah, Bill, I think you got to unmute her.
Oh, there. Can you hear me? Am I there? Okay. A year and a half in and we're still asking that question. Okay. So I'm going to go over the report. I'm going to talk more about, it's in the initial stages. Like I've written the rough draft. We're going to be finalizing it soon, but so I'm just going to talk about it. Not a lot changed from the first survey in 2019. I want to say that off the bat. So while we got half the participants this time around is the first time, the numbers didn't really change significantly. But a couple of the things that are still important to know, right, would be that 40% of people who answered have been on some form of public assistance, whether that be unemployment or food stamps, Medi-Cal, right, all of those things, Medicaid. There was an increase of people who made below $3,500 per course per semester. So there were more people this time around that made less money. 48% did not know if they would have classes until 1 month prior to the semester. This survey was taken in between May and August, and we still had a lot of people who didn't know if they would have classes. The other thing I want to give context to is when this came out, obviously May and August of last year, that was right during the height of the lockdowns and the pandemic and everything that was going on. So a lot of people, I know my campus did this where they weren't giving out classes because nobody knew what the fall would look like. They didn't know if they would be online, in person, right? But that still impacts how we can prepare for our classes or if we're preparing for classes, right? And our lives in general. And so this, I wanted to say, I wasn't going to say it at first, but Geoff, because you brought up being on campus and being sick and being exposed to people, only 44% of participants are getting their healthcare. If they're having healthcare, it's coming from their employer, right? So you want me to risk my life, but you won't pay for my healthcare. Like, what is this? That's literally what I told them when I said I wouldn't go back to campus in fall. So now, because again, not a lot changed from 2019, I do want to focus more on this survey, which was heavily on COVID and how that had impacted people. And I want to talk a lot more about the preparedness and the difference between full-time and part-time faculty, or the perception of that in being prepared for certain things on campus. So one of the things came to training, right? And being trained for emergencies on campus, what to do with students who have been harassed, what to do with students who have been assaulted, how to handle a natural disaster. And only 40% felt that they were not adequately prepared for those types of issues. They did not feel that they knew what to do if they or a student were a victim of a crime, that they were targets of prejudice. And 40% of faculty did not feel that they knew the proper steps to take if a student had mental health issues. So that's a huge portion of your faculty that don't know what to do or don't feel that they know what to do in case of an emergency or other situations where students are going to come to them. Another issue was office hours. The way that this question was worded, I'm still not sure if we want to leave it in or not, but I think the biggest takeaway from the office hours question, and I say the wording only because the way that it was worded wasn't like, are these office hours that you have to hold per semester or per week? That wasn't clarified. But the biggest part of this is that 32, almost 33% of faculty that answered this were not required to hold office hours at all. So a third of faculty are not even being asked to do that outside work with their students. That doesn't mean they're not doing that work. So when people asked, are you working more office hours than you're compensated for? The answer was yes for 68.6%, which is almost 70% of faculty. Even if they're being paid for office hours or required to hold them, they're doing even more work outside the classroom with these students than they're being asked to do or required to do. And we know that for first-gen students, office hours and relationships with faculty are how we know that they are successful. And we know that that helps them to stay in school and retain them and all of that. And yet we're not paying people for all of the work that they're doing. Shifting over into the pandemic, 93% of people were teaching in person when this hit. And by April 1st, 90% were now online, right? So it completely shifted from an in-person to an online setting very quickly. When it came to whether or not people were prepared for this, though, that was a huge issue. So only 15% were provided with hardware to teach online. So with computers, routers, internet, web cameras, all of that. 62% were provided with the tech tools to teach online, such as a Zoom account, online learning platforms, right? We use Canvas, but I think Blackboard's another big one. 19%, only 19.9% felt that they had been given enough for enough support to transfer online completely, right? So these were some of the biggest takeaways that I saw and that I noticed when I was writing the report. And a lot of people felt very scared to move online, or not to move online, excuse me, to go back in person. A lot of people did not feel safe or comfortable going back in person. But the report, like I said, it's in the initial stages. That's the rough draft. There's a lot more to cover in there that I will get into later, well, when you read the final report. So yeah, that's where we're at.
Yeah, I'm sorry, we're just short of time, but Bobbi-Lee, thank you so much, and we're looking forward. And just so everybody knows, we are planning other future general meetings, and hopefully then we can have Bobbi-Lee present her findings more in full, should she have the time to. Thanks, Bobbi-Lee.
Thank you.
Yeah. So now we're going to be having a panel discussion going on here, and I just wanted to make sure, do we have Ed Muir in the room?
Yeah, wait a minute. We have one bit of
Oh,
business.
I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Okay, so we did do a major revision. We have to get this business out of the way, being it's a meeting. We did do a major revision of our bylaws. We had a great committee and worked very hard. We met for month after month after month, put the revisions together. We sent it out to the membership for a vote, and the revisions were passed by 96%, a 96% yes vote. So I just need to report that we will be putting out a final version of our new bylaws and sending them out to the membership. Anyone that would like to, put forth any additional revisions, there's a process in the bylaws for it. That's not what this meeting tonight is about. I just wanted to report that the revisions have been passed. And with that, I'll pass it back to Geoff.
Okay, thank you very much, Bill. So we're going to be having a panel discussion from two of our AFT national staffers. The first of which is Ed Muir, and I apologize because I'm writing all this information down. And Ed, I'm going to confess I forgot your official title. I don't have it written in front of me here, but Ed has been active for 25 years. And just to give you an idea, like when I've tried to talk with sometimes people in the national level to find out who's in the know about this or that, Ed's name pops up quite a bit. So, he's very much on the pulse of that. And the other person I wanted to basically introduce is the AFT Higher Ed Director, Alyssa Picard. And I thought, I would read a little bit more of Ed's bio, but I just want to get into a little bit of Alyssa's bio if I could. She started as a GTA at the University of Michigan studying in history and working as the lead negotiator there. She was she was able to achieve basically getting the first language in the contract, providing childcare opportunities for Michigan employees. She then went on to work for AFT Michigan for over a decade. During at the same time, she also worked as both a history and economics adjunct at Wayne State University. So she knows that experience. In 2013, she was loaned out to AFT National to work with San Francisco Community College on their struggle against the ACCJC. And sadly, the effects on San Francisco as a result of the ACCJC's actions are still present. But the work that AFT did there and the tireless work of the instructors and faculties there not only saved a community college, but basically made great inroads into helping and saving and preserving education in all of the California community college system. She now works as the AFT staff director in higher ed, and she also works with their member-facing programs, such as those covering student debt. And with that said, I'm going to turn the floor over to Ed and Alyssa. Thank you.
Thank you. Alyssa, do you actually wanted to go first, I thought, or?
I am happy for us to use your slide deck as a segue to larger conversation. Ed has a much better looking, in a sense of existing, slide deck than I do.
If you guys don't mind, I'm going to share screen and go through a set of slides. And if you're, this is based on something I did to the PPC and then like presented to Elaine and Bill and their colleagues, and I think was the genesis of me being asked to do this. So I'm gonna see if I can get this going.
You should be able to share your screen, Ed.
All right, something's happening. And hit that. Let's see. There we go. I am screen sharing, so I'm going to hit slideshow now. It is kind of scary that I am like not perfect at this yet. You'd think that I would be better.
It's a pandemic, Ed. None of us are going to
I know. There we go. Okay. So, well, this has been the craziest state legislative session that we have had. And oh, my notes are showing up over there. That's all right. I think you're good. So this has been the craziest state legislative session that we have had since 2011. And I think the thing that typifies both this and 2011, the broad commonality is gains that the Republicans made in the election that allowed things to happen in a different way than had previously been happening. And the Republican Party is a different beast now than it was then, but that I think sets the context for a lot of what's going on right now in the country. And if you look at just the partisan setup of the country, there are, I think, 14 blue states where the Democrats control a trifecta, 23 or 24 red states where the Republicans control a trifecta, and then the rest are some degree of mixed control. And so there aren't that many more people living in states that are red. There might even be less when you add it up because the blue states tend to be more populous, but the Republicans control more nodes of power, more places where they can do things state legislatively. And so it feels like they are in control of the agenda, I think, if you're doing state policy work day in, day out. And they're doing a bunch of stuff. They're being very active this year. And I'm going to go through some of this very quickly because I could do 3 or 4 hours on this. So, but I'm going to go through the hallmarks of the things that they are advancing, some of the things that you are seeing us advance, and some of the things that you're seeing within the broader Democratic Party structure and liberalism and kind of give you a set of where we are kind of in state capitals right now, and bring that back around to higher ed, because a lot of this is coming into your world. So the first big piece you know about is the attack on voting rights. And these omnibus voter rights, like restriction bills, have passed in 3 states, but there's about a dozen states that have passed pieces of the Republican agenda. And you know there's a big fight in Texas going on. And if you read about it, the Brennan Center is always talking about the bills in more than 40 states. And if you focus, though, the places where this is moving and where there's real fights are in the deeper red states where they have a pass. And then I'm going to add Michigan to that, because Michigan has this bizarre override of the veto by citizens petition that gives the legislature a lot of stick if they're organized together to pass a voting rights restriction bill. And the big concern for me, at least here, is that what a lot of this activity is about normalizing the process for state legislative intervention into our elections. It's not just the things that they are doing in the law. It is the idea that the state legislature is actually looking at the last election, saying they don't like the results, and setting up a process to get to what they think will be a better result. They're not being very opaque about that, really. And I think this is going to set the process for a 2022 and a 2024 that are very concerning if you paid attention to and followed what state legislatures were being asked to do by the Trumpist right in the run-up to the election, in terms of like seating their own electors and things like that. There's a normalization, I think, that is going on around like extreme state legislative intervention in elections. This slide gives you some details on the Georgia bill, and it is the most comprehensive of them and has a number of things that are very concerning. An almost unique feature of it is the idea that the state gave itself more power to intervene with local boards of election. But there are elements of the Georgia bill that have passed in the states that have passed this. And the most common elements that you're seeing in legislation that's moving in is restricting assistance in returning a mail ballot. They would describe this as fighting mail ballot harvesting, limits on how many drop boxes there are, stricter voter ID. Sometimes that's in person, sometimes that's applying it to the to vote by mail in Montana and New Hampshire in particular. Montana for sure, New Hampshire, I believe. My recall is suddenly slipping. It's voter ID, it's student IDs not being the sole voter ID. Purging voter rolls. This is editing the voter roll of people who haven't voted recently and doing it in a way that allows you to potentially like get rid of the registrations of people who should be in there, who are low propensity voters, and reducing the polling site availability for early voting or the voting hours, and shortening the windows for mail ballots so that it's harder to get mail balloting done. Those are kind of the main like thrusts that we're seeing in a lot of the legislation. And then there's a set of states that are making it easier to vote. Easier voter registration, automatic voter registration in some cases, expanding the windows for early voting, making it easier to vote by mail. In Connecticut and New York, they're having to change the Constitution to do that. In Virginia, they've actually basically adopted the Voting Rights Act into state law. And so that's kind of a big picture piece of where things are on voting rights. And I think it's kind of typical of where a lot of the issues are, generally speaking. We have had another year. Actually, it's picked up this year. We'd had about 4 or 5 years where the attacks on public sector unions had slowed down, and we weren't seeing them at the same pace that we were seeing them in right after the 2010 election. But it's picked back up this year, and in a big way. Arkansas passed legislation that outlaws public sector collective bargaining in the state, which sounds worse than it is, although it's still bad. There's really only one state and local government contract in Arkansas. The Little Rock Education Association had a contract with the NEA. And this is what we don't do a lot of work in Arkansas. So this one I'm not have all the details of. They lost collective bargaining rights when the state appointed a board to govern the school district, and the contract expired and the state appointed board refused to negotiate a new contract. And then the legislature came in and made that binding, passing this law. Indiana, we now in K-12 have to get our members to sign dues cards every year. They no longer, one dues card doesn't last until you decide it's done. You have to like go through the process. And in West Virginia, they've outlawed public sector dues deduction. We're in litigation on that right now, but we expect that it's a long shot that the West Virginia Supreme Court is going to side with us. The initial court did. And so those attacks all passed this year. Attacks in Montana, New Hampshire, Florida, Kansas, and Louisiana all fell short. And the kind of expect that some of these will be back next year or the year after. If it's a bad midterm election, these things will pick up more momentum and more speed in 2023. And then the other side of it, legislation to expand union rights. We've had a whole set of legislation that has passed in states where we have friends in power who, after Janus, to help us organize our unions, to make it easier to communicate with our members, to give us access to the facility, to make sure that we have appropriate lists, that very good basic legislation to support the kind of organizing and you need in order to sustain your union after Janus. And Connecticut had not passed that because of some things that happened politically and then the pandemic legislative session. And so they passed it this year. New Jersey is going on legislation it's like the third generation of their post-Janus legislation, and that is stalled out. That's got major public sector management opposition, unlike the earlier like post-Janus bills that were largely all right with management. This one would actually prevent public colleges from imposing settlements, is my understanding. But they did pass legislation there to limit outsourcing and privatization on campus. We are hoping next year in Colorado to go back to legislation that stalled this year that would give public sector higher education workers and faculty in particular the right to bargain. And this year Maryland legislature passed a community college bargaining bill, and the governor vetoed it in May, and we are hoping for an override. So there are good things that are happening in addition to the bad things. Then looking at stuff that is happening like that is more directly for about higher education. There is a whole set of stuff around academic free speech. In particular, Florida passed a law that's very concerning that it mandates the annual assessment of intellectual freedom and viewpoint diversity. There are legislators who are talking about making this something that they will base institutional funding on. The bill also has language related to non-consensual recording of faculty. It is a two-party consent state to record conversations now, and they have modified that for activities in the classroom and on campus. You can record without consent for your own purposes or for a complaint to the public institution of higher education where the recording was made, or as an evidence in preparation for a criminal or civil proceeding. The recording can't be published without consent of a faculty member, but this is something that once the recording happens, these things have a way of getting themselves out into the world. So that was not good legislation that passed this year. You're seeing a bunch of stuff about trans youth. Most of it is focused on sports, and when you read the bills, it is not higher education specific, but is adjacent to higher education, but the debates approach higher education. There's also legislation that prohibits trans youth from receiving appropriate health care. One state has passed that. It was introduced in 20 states. And to the extent that there are minors who are receiving medical treatments that affirm their sense of their gender, this would affect the students in your institutions. And then the thing that is taken up a great deal of time, attention, and concern is the attack on critical race theory. This actually has, right now, most of the energy on this, it feels like, is in school boards and on Fox News. But it started with at Boise State in Idaho, and the Idaho Freedom Foundation, which is a state policy network affiliate, and that's the right-wing state level think tank network that is basically a legacy of the Koch network when they're still there, but this is their baby. And they put out a report basically and have, if you read their website about like wokeness in higher education and all of the other things that they are doing, it is very troubling and very feels like a think tank or a communications organization from a different planet. And they did this expose of Boise State that led to the Idaho legislation. And it's the Boise State's internal investigation hasn't been able to document key elements of the initial reporting from the Idaho Freedom Foundation, which is not a surprise. But this has led now to legislation. There are 22 states with bills about the teaching of critical race theory or the 1619 Project. 8 of those bills specifically cover higher ed. 4 of those have passed into law in Iowa, Idaho, New Hampshire, and Oklahoma. And it's died down a little bit, but there's always the sense of I'm wondering if there's a bill that I missed somehow in that. But that's my counting of, and my team's counting of what's going on. And I think that in 2022, in the state legislatures, at least, this is going to pick up again. In all of the red states that didn't do it, you're going to see a bill on day one to come at you on this stuff. And that brings me to the budget. And this is the part where it's like you feel like maybe we should all be drinking or hugging or something, going from critical race theory to the pandemic recession. So by December of last year, we were down 353,000 jobs in state government education. That is, state government education is a Bureau of Labor Statistics category when it does the employment survey, and it is the category that covers most of public higher education. There are some community colleges that go into local education. There's some state K-12 direct services in state government higher education, but it's really, this is public higher education in the US, is the bulk of it. And that 353,000 jobs is 14% of that category of worker. And by March of this year, we were still down 304,000 jobs. We'd only gained back 49,000. And the rescue plan coincides with, and this is a correlation or causality kind of question, but it coincides with a rapid uptake in rehiring. And we've added 136,000 of those jobs back now. And we're now down 168K. So we've cut the loss in half, basically, which is, I think, tremendously good news, actually, that we've done that. And I'm hoping that momentum continues. It gives us the chance that there's some chance we may go into the fall with an employment level overall that is close to where we were when the pandemic began. And part of that is the rescue fund, but there are some states that have done a lot of really good work. New York had major tax increases this legislative session. Illinois closed a major amount of corporate loopholes. There's an income tax that's coming on the ballot in Massachusetts, which I'm very excited about. Washington did an adjusted capital gains tax, and California isn't done yet, but right now the CFT is working very hard on a wealth tax campaign at the state level, which would be a unique innovation in American tax policy, and one that's long overdue. So it's a lovely thing.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to finish by, and I saw that this was already in the chat, that the state that from what we saw had an outstanding year for contingent faculty is Oregon, where they passed a bill about student loan forgiveness and basically setting the system and the glide path by which you can qualify for student loan forgiveness, and requiring that the employer give you notification about your student loan forgiveness status. They also created a part-time health insurance fund, and this goes further than some other places because it put $14 million almost into a trust fund for part-time faculty to access to have insurance. And if you work at least a half-time load, and it doesn't matter, oh, my spelling is bad on this slide, sorry about that, across your public institutions, you qualify to be able to enroll at whichever one of your public employers you would like to enroll at. And then they also passed a governance bill, which took the non-voting members of their higher education coordinating commission at the state level, and which were students and faculty and staff, and turned them into voting members and created a graduate student voting position as well. So I thought and these are policies that we work on with affiliates to try to get them to advance and learn about and move forward. So this was, I thought, like seeing these things all at once was a good thing. And I will stop at that.
Thank you very much, Ed, and congratulations, Oregon, on the good work. Alyssa, I'm going to have you come in, but I just wanted to acknowledge we're going to be having Aimee Lousell from the Scholars for New Deal in Higher Education coming in, and she actually has to leave at 4:30. So I'm just kind of putting that out there in terms of the time constraint that we have. Alyssa, go ahead.
Yeah, happy to do. So I'm going to try and give you some sort of broad stroke sense of what we are seeing happen at the federal level with respect to White House and Biden administration priorities, kind of how higher education fits into that stuff, and make sure that we leave adequate time for questions and discussion, because that's always the most productive part of a conversation. Ed talked about the attacks on voting rights at the state level. Obviously, in a country where voting rights are primarily administered at the state level, those state level fights are really important. We are also, as you have seen, seeing federal legislators playing a strong role in trying to set the conditions for the 2022 and 2024 elections so that they will be fair and free elections. That is a top organizational priority of the AFT, as well as a top priority of the Biden administration, partly because it is so foundational to our ability to accomplish anything thereafter. Significant additional deterioration in voting rights would be catastrophic for not only everything we have fought to preserve so far, but also for the prospect of some of the new things that we would like to win. And we're also obviously seeing the administration focus and Congress continue to focus on COVID recovery and kind of the ongoing question of how to deal with a continuing pandemic into its second year, which is having impacts in all parts of the economy and all AFT workplaces. Virtually everyone who is an AFT member is in a workplace that has been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. Educators, healthcare providers, public officials, and public servants in our public government workplaces across the country have all been stressed and stretched in new ways by what has gone on in COVID. And so a second big body of work that we do as a national union and are kind of have as a lens when we're talking about our federal higher education priorities is that lens of what has this looked like so far in the pandemic and what are we expecting to have come next. We are excited in the middle of this to begin the work on movement toward a new deal for higher education, which is a campaign that AFT has embarked on together with AAUP and the Scholars Committee for a New Deal in Higher Ed. This was a concept that was originated by a group of faculty that had kind of some anchors in Rutgers, but not only at Rutgers, and who, once they had originated the concept, kind of came forward to AFT and AAUP and said, we think this is a big idea and we think it needs to move very far. And we know that we don't want to try to build a new structure to make this idea move. We would like the two organizations that represent faculty and higher education and the interests of faculty and higher education kind of the most intimately to be driving the work of the campaign. And so we are, kind of moving steps along in that process. One of the most exciting things about that, about the work on the New Deal for higher education is that it's giving us an opportunity to really have a much more prolonged and serious conversation about what it looks like to meaningfully and permanently change the working conditions of contingent faculty. I have heard John Govsky express this in meetings as are we going to, as some of the current legislation that has been introduced in Congress, some of which has been introduced many years in a row. Some of it sort of holds out there would be a 75% threshold of teaching done by tenure or tenure track faculty. And those of you who were AFT members or activists at the time, many years ago, when AFT was kind of taking a first crack at how do we meaningfully mitigate the impact of contingency on contingent faculty, will remember that that structure looks a lot like a thing called the FACE campaign, the Faculty and College Excellence Campaign, which was an AFT initiative to promote more full-time and tenure track hiring. We have heard very resoundingly from contingent faculty over the years that they don't like that model. On the other hand, we have heard very resoundingly from other members over the years that they do like that model. We have to work this out because we need to know which model we're going to be holding up as we move forward in this campaign. And so I think having the time and the space to really go at those conversations, some of them formally within the umbrella of the New Deal for higher ed, some of them not, is actually beneficial overall. It's a process that has lots of opportunity for discussion and consideration, which I think is very positive, even though it's frustrating that making significant changes to the higher education system as it stands is not in those top two most likely to be moved upon federal legislative priorities right at this moment. The other piece of work that I will highlight, because it's related to the work that we do in the higher education department, is that stuff that Geoff mentioned, our union-wide work on our members' student loan debts, and the impact that those have on folks as we are facing the potential expiration of the payment pause at the end of September. Some of you who are tracking this closely may have seen the news just last week, maybe late the week before, that FedLoan, which is the servicer that is responsible for keeping track of people's progress toward achieving public service loan forgiveness, has just told the federal government that they will no longer be a contractor as of the end of December. So they are exiting the scene. There is going to have to be some transition of the accounts of borrowers who have been serviced by FedLoan. In every one of those transitions, there is data loss, some of which is catastrophic for members. We have a lot of concerns about what that process is going to look like. And we so far have not heard very much detail from the administration at all about how they expect it to go. We would prefer that the Biden administration take action to cancel the remaining student loan debt of people who are in public service and have been making payments for 10 years, which is kind of the original core promise of public service loan forgiveness. We also stand for the cancellation of student loan debt on a more broad basis, but particularly for our members who are in public service and who are entitled to full cancellation on the basis of that public service. We think it's really important and that it needs to be done soon. Back to that first priority about elections and how to win them, dumping a whole bunch of people who just had the student loan payments turned back on for loans that are $7, $8, $12, $1,500 a month is not the best way to keep your voters in your coalition and get them to show up at the polls. So these things are all intertwined with one another, and we're kind of trying to deal with them in a way that recognizes that as we go. I would say, just like in a broader way, kind of atmospherics about the Biden administration and its views on higher education, to the extent that this is helpful for folks to hear, because I feel like we have sort of an unusual vantage point on it in the national office at AFT. The Biden administration's thinking about higher ed is influenced really strongly, I think, by two very personal experiences that the president has of higher education. The first one is his wife, Dr. Jill Biden's status as a teacher at a community college. The thoughts of the president and everyone involved in the administration when they think about higher education reflexively turn to community colleges in a very, very aggressive kind of way. And that's something we have to constantly be sort of working with and pushing back on, because we have many members, there are many students who are not attending community colleges. The other piece of to the extent that I can see the psychology that seems to stand out, I think you might have seen on display in one of the town halls that the president did several months ago, where a borrower asked him, how are you going to work with us to cancel student loan debt? And he said, I'm not going to work with you to cancel student loan debt. Kids who went to Harvard, kids who went to Yale, they shouldn't have their student loan debt canceled. They have incredible privilege and, amazing opportunities. I think that's like kind of a 1984 narrative of higher education and how it works. And I think all of the pushing that we have to do on the administration to kind of push back on that narrative of how higher education works is, properly within our shared purview of how do we make that happen? How do we help them to understand that this is not just about improving conditions and making community college itself more affordable, and that the experiences of people with student loan debt are not the experiences of people who are extremely privileged and attend elite institutions. If you were wealthy, you would not have had student loan debt in the first place. So I'll stop there because I'm mindful of time and want to make sure that there's plenty of time for question and answer. But just wanted to kind of put some ideas out there to start with. And I see many, many, many things in the chat that now I really want to know what they are.
Okay, well, I think people have been just making sort of general comments. I would probably say we're going to have to leave it to 1 or 2 questions. I want to be respectful of the fact that Aimee came in and she does have to leave at 4:30. And I also just want to do a shout out to Jennifer Shanoski. Jennifer, so thanks for your patience. Hang in there. We'll try to get you as soon as we can. But go ahead. Does anybody have any questions?
Anyone can unmute themselves right now.
Yeah, so David Milroy, go ahead.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Geoff. I had a question for Alyssa. You mentioned Jill Biden, who is obviously a community college professor. Where is she on speaking about part-time faculty concerns? I've never heard her say anything or respond to anything about part-time faculty.
I have not heard her speak to the issue either. She is, as you may know, an NEA member, which means that in the kind of logical progression of how she would be talked to, there is some sensibility that pushing her to have a more public stance on part-time faculty concerns is something that should come from within NEA membership because she is a member. And I'm looking at the notes here. You're right. And I think Geoff is actually pointing to another factor here that's really important. It's important in all of DC and in the policy advocacy community, which is that there's a huge population of people who have been adjuncts under what I would describe as lawyer circumstances. Like they are people have, because there are a billion lawyers around here. They have full-time law jobs. They teach in an avocational kind of way, and they believe that they understand who is being talked about and what conditions are being described when they are talked to about adjunct and contingent faculty. That has been a problem in Hill offices for a very long time. As I say, I have not been involved in a conversation with Dr. Biden, so I cannot speak to the extent to which she may or may not have that view of things. But I think, I think there is some possibility there, and that it's one that we have to think about how to approach strategically for an outcome that's really the most we can get out of it.
Yeah, I was actually going to respond to that real quick because we did actually have a written letter, a typed letter delivered to her by Sandra Behringer, where she actually sat down and read it directly. I also basically approached her and asked her directly about this issue on an NEA call-in, which was, the question was facilitated by the NEA president. And both times she gave the same answer, which is, I have to study the issue. So that's a direct quote. Anyway, with that said, David, go ahead.
Thank you, Alyssa. That's very informative as a presentation. I'm kind of curious, though. I'm hearing, as a political scientist, I'm hearing two different threads in what I'm hearing in this presentation and the chat, because I'm hearing the a sort of a pragmatic politics, and I'm hearing an ideological politics. I'm hearing the people that are saying we have to cancel all student loan debt immediately, and that's not something that's on the table, versus other proposals of $10,000 cancellation. I mean, when I hear people talk about 4 free years of college, when what's on the table is really discussion of two free years of college. So I'm just curious, where are we as a union and an organization in terms of what sort of politics we're engaging in order to try and work with an administration that is frankly much more pragmatic than some of us might like, but in the ideal world, but we're not in the ideal world.
A great
Alyssa?
question. I would love to hear, other folks' thoughts on this.
Yeah, well, yeah, I would like to too. The only concern I have is I know that Aimee has to take off at 4:30. So, and Alyssa, you're welcome back anytime. It'd be great if you.
I'm also happy to stay till after Aimee has to leave. So if we want to pick the conversation back up, that would be just fine too.
Oh, that'd be great. If you could do that, it'd be really appreciate it. The rest of you up with that? Thumbs up? All right. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Aimee. And Aimee, I just wanted to let everybody know, Aimee is a co-facilitator for Scholars for a New Deal in Higher Education, which is basically partnered with AFT AAUP for the New Deal for Higher Ed campaign, as well as other collaborations with ally organization. Her career includes multiple contingent positions, such as adjunct professor and assuming visiting adjunct professor and postdoctoral fellow. She studies the modern US as a hub for transitional labor and capital with an interest in women workers, gender, race, and migration. Her current project is creating Norm Array, Puerto Rican needle workers and Southern labor activists in regions in Reagan's America, apologies here, which allows women through the, follows women through the 20th century disaggregation of textile and garment manufacturing. And without further ado, Aimee, go ahead.
Thanks, Geoff. Thanks for inviting me. I'm sorry that I had some preset stuff that I have to deal with. And I always like to include some of my research interests in my biography, because one of my key interests as somebody who's always been contingent is to say we're not just teachers, we're also, many of us, still interested in research and would like some access to those research funds that other folks get. And I will be part of a panel at the OAH in Boston called Research in the Age of Contingency to talk about that issue. Which leads me into my comments about Scholars for a New Deal for Higher Ed, which is a collection of scholars who, in their desire for academic service to try to reinvigorate higher education, especially in response to the pandemic, have multiple partnerships. So we're not a single issue organization. So I like to foreground that and say we're really interested in several issues. And fair labor is one of them. Budget activism is another. And so we have multiple partnerships. One of them is the New Deal for Higher Ed, which some folks get a little confused on because the names are so similar. I am going to just share my screen really quick. So this is the Scholars for New Deal, which is our website if you're interested in learning more about us, and it kind of lists some of the variety of stuff that we do. And then, as Alyssa mentioned, one of our partnerships is the project A New Deal for Higher Ed, and this is organized with National AAUP and National AFT. And it put together a platform. It's a general platform. It's a one-page platform. Again, if you're interested, Scholars for a New Deal is the organization of scholars. This is just one of our partnerships. And it's in a very important partnership. Like Alyssa said, it's really working across the national unions and building investment by the membership in some of the lobbying. We also did this issue of Academe, Scholars for New Deal edited this. It's AUP's magazine, and it covers, again, the range of topics we're interested in. So it covers public funding, union coalitions, HBCUs, contingent labor, and graduate student workers. So I just want to make sure that that's kind of floating out there. Our most recent project that we partnered with grew out of the fact that Scholars for New Deal wrote a 3-page brief to Bernie Sanders' office regarding the College for All bill. So Bernie Sanders' office wrote that in 2017. We did not write it. Sanders and his staff wrote it. But they wanted to rewrite it in 2021 because they knew Biden was coming in and we were going to have this big churn of massive legislation in 2021. So we submitted a 3-page brief. We covered, again, all those types of issues that I just outlined, and contingency was one of them. But we also needed to deal with the fact that Sanders' office was interested in the 75% full-time as a marker for receiving federal funds. We did not suggest that. That was Sanders' idea. And along that idea of pragmatics versus ideology, we decided, well, pragmatically, tens of millions and potentially billions of dollars was going to float out there with higher ed, possibly as a target. And we didn't want to just sit back and let that bill go forward without trying to impact it. Now, of course, College for All means nothing really, because in the current debates, it's now all about the infrastructure bill. So we decided to coordinate this higher ed labor summit because we realized we need to have a long-term vision for union locals and Scholars for a New Deal to have a vision, because College for All was already just one of many proposals going into this infrastructure negotiation. Now, whatever comes out of this, they're still trying to work with the Republicans in the Senate to maybe get some funding for like hard infrastructure, like highways and bridges. That's bipartisan. The soft infrastructure is most likely going to be in budget reconciliation. The Republicans are not going to buy into soft infrastructure. Higher ed, education, social services, all of that is soft infrastructure. So it's going into budget reconciliation. It's not going to be proposed through an individual bill like College for All. So once that kind of sank in, we were like, okay, now what do we do to keep unions and keep this labor, kind of this fervor that we see going on? Now, for us with Scholars for New Deal, we wanted to build coalition unions, and we connected, as Alyssa said, we connected with Todd Wolfson at Rutgers AUP AFT, because his mission is to build union coalitions, and he wants to take it beyond just faculty. So he builds union coalitions with staff, grad student unions, museum workers, if there's a museum or archive on a campus, healthcare workers. Rutgers has a massive hospital and medical training facility. So for this labor, and I'll share it here. So for this vision platform, which came out of the July summit, Geoff attended one part of it. We did breakout sessions, but we had all these types of unions. So we had unions from all over the country. Some of them were mixed, tenured, full-time, contingent, adjunct. Some of them were just contingent. Some of them were staff. Some of them, like some in the South, were wall-to-wall, meaning everybody was in the same union. Janitors, staff, academic tutors, grad students, and faculty were all in the same union. So our model for labor activism is really many tiers. We don't look at it as just adjunct versus tenure. We say there's many different tiers in tenure. There's many different tiers in contingency now. As Geoff said, I've been an adjunct part-time with no benefits. I've been a visiting adjunct where I had benefits. I had another offer where I was going to be a visiting adjunct with no benefits. And I've been a postdoc with benefits. So we even say contingency is not even like one set monolith anymore. Grad students are extremely exploited now. They teach very heavy course loads, often do most of the grading, and in the sciences do most of the lab work, and then get very little pay and often no benefits. So we really want a multi-tiered model for this labor movement where we say all higher ed workers are going to be part of this vision. So this came out of that conversation. So we got input from everybody by doing breakout sessions. So we had 300 people attend, and then we broke people up into groups of like about 10, and a facilitator took notes, and then we put together this, well, I shouldn't say this. We put together a draft, and then we had people continue to make comments on the draft. And then this is what came out of that. So this is not a Scholars for New Deal document. I want to say that straight out. This is a document created by over 300 workers of all different types, putting input into a document via 70 union locals that participated in the summit. So Scholars for New Deal was just one partner. Just like with the New Deal for Higher Ed, or our partnership with the Roosevelt Institute, or a partnership we have with the Debt Collective, we just try to facilitate and support the projects, but this is by no means like our declaration. This was really a collaborative union effort. And so commitment 1 involves nationwide action for federal government intervention. Again, we just really saw that if Biden is in the White House and we have, albeit a razor thin majority of Democrats in Congress, this was an opportunity to try to really push for as much as possible. And so these 4 commitments were what all the union members in the event were willing to commit to. But then we said, okay, what are we going to do when the Congress flips and there is no longer a Democratic majority controlling both houses? And we were like, well, we need to use our nationwide momentum to realign our campuses. Rather than having campus by campus fights, right, where this one's fighting this contract issue, this one over here is trying to fight that their religion and language departments are being cut, this one over here is trying to fight that 70% of their adjuncts have had their sections cut by half this year. You know, we're fighting fires on multiple campuses individually. Let's create nationwide actions that are coordinated across the union locals to say, okay, what union locals are all fighting to get adjunct pay equity and health insurance? Then let's all those campuses all do nationwide actions together to show that there's nationwide pressure on their boards, on their administrators, on their state legislature. That's harder in some states than others. So that's why we didn't get super specific in this, because obviously somebody fighting that fight in Alabama, where they don't have collective bargaining rights, is going to have a very different fight than somebody in California, where they have an amazing set of contracts for many of the contingent and adjunct faculty. And we also just didn't want to leave out staff, because again, academic staff loads for tutoring, for special needs students, for multicultural programs, their caseloads are getting massive. They're servicing, you know, up to 1,000 students per staff member. They're also becoming increasingly precarious. So we also have stuff in here related to staff needs and grad student needs. And then the last, the commitment 3 was about what actions do we actually imagine being able to share? And this set of 1 through 8 was kind of some ideas of how we could go forward, directing things towards Congress, directing things towards rulemaking in the Department of Labor and the Department of Education, directing things towards, like we see here, federal institutions that provide funding through the NEH, the NIH, the NSF, that this funding should be tied to labor provisions and ensuring that these campuses are not exploiting workers. We also have in here research funds and benefits, and address the fact that not all contingent folks are going to want to pursue tenure. That tenure, full-time employment, and pay equity and access to benefits are all part of the package. Again, we don't view this as a two-tier problem of we just need to get everyone from one tier into another, or we need to fix everybody in one tier. What we really view this as is it's a multi-tiered higher ed with lots of different faculty status, lots of different staff status. And that what we need is just a stable employment for everybody and options for everybody, including teaching tenure, research tenure, service tenure for faculty that are in extension campuses or work for agriculture schools and medical facilities, and then also improve benefits for all contingents who are already full-time and have benefits, but might have overloaded courses, to contingents who are adjuncts who wonder, like I did, up to the week before the semester started, am I gonna have course sections? Are they filling? Like, are they gonna keep my classes for this semester and next semester? I have no access to health insurance. So we wanna make sure that we address all of those needs in a way that welcomes everybody into an alliance. I want to leave a couple minutes for questions. I can prolong my entry into my next event by like 5 minutes. I'll just go late, but I did want to, oh, and sorry, the last commitment is just a statement that we commit to our work and build solidarity together to fight in our communities and across the country and its territories as a true coordinated higher education labor movement to transform our systems and our lives. So the idea is to just say, we're not the same. We're not all equivalent, but we all have the same goal of wanting to increase funding with fair labor, fair budgeting, and better access for all students. So I'll leave it at that and then just say, I'm also happy to have people give me some questions. I've got like 4 minutes.
Okay, yeah, we're going to be limited at that. And I just want to do a big quick shout out. Jennifer, are you still hanging in there? Yeah, sorry. I owe you a coffee the next time I see you. Okay, good enough. Go ahead, Aimee.
I didn't know if anyone had any questions.
Anybody have a question? You're welcome to raise your hand. Yeah, Grace Chi. Go ahead, Grace.
Hi, thank you so much, and thanks for all that you're doing. I was especially intrigued because our local is going to go through a campaign to promote health insurance, and I liked what you were saying about getting behind a local that is working on some significant change and making that part of a national campaign. And do you already have sort of a system in place for that, or are you recommending it? How would we connect with you? Because I love that idea about supporting.
What I love that because we're right at that stage now. So this was the first time we gathered this many union locals all together and really got a sense of participation and agreement. Our next step is we're going to start creating some working groups and some templates for how do we get to connect locals into this kind of core group of union locals that are already connected and already organized. So I'm going to put my email, sorry, I'm trying to find everybody. I'm going to put my email in here because what we're doing right now is we're sending out, we've created a template email to send just to exactly folks like you who are like, well, we didn't participate in the summit, or we did, but we're not sure what we're doing. And over the next year of activism, and we're sending them this template email that just says, please register your union here with a contact. So we have a list of contacts so we can say, okay, this is what's going on, you know, and keep people connected. If beyond that, what we're starting with, first of all, for the next 3 months is to try to influence the infrastructure bill. So I will say that they're going to probably have to pass this by October 1st. So we have a very short window of 2 months to try to get higher ed funding with labor provisions. And I understand David Albert's point. Right now, it looks like it's just going to be 2-year colleges. We're still going to hammer for the next 2 months on, no, it needs to be 2-year, 4-year colleges, and it needs to be attached to labor provisions. We're not happy with even the limited labor provisions that Sanders is talking about, but we're afraid that we're not going to get anything. So that's our next 2 months grace. But after September 30th and October 1st, our plan is to start some of that campus by campus stuff.
Thank you.
Because I know, Aimee, you have to go.
Yes.
Thank you so much. I think I'm connected with you in email, but anything that you get out to us, we're definitely going to share with us. You know, want to support you any way we can.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. So now we're going to go ahead and move over, and we've talked a lot about, you know, some of the stuff that's happening that, you know, in terms of movement, sort of what the political situation is nationally. We've also kind of taken a look at some of the aspirational work that we tried to do. I think it's great now that the next person we're going to have going up is going to talk about very real work that has been done and very real accomplishments. And I just wanted to say this first before we go in. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Peralta Federation of Teachers, and I'm not sure if it's Peralta Federation of Teachers or Peralta Federation of Faculty, they have consistently been one of the strongest colleges in terms of you know, their ratio of adjunct to full-time pay. And what we're going to be hearing about is we're going to be hearing about the process where they basically have raised themselves as closer to the bar to parity than pretty much any of the other California community colleges. And it's a very exciting campaign to hear about. I do also want to acknowledge this. I have served with Jennifer on the CFT Legislative Committee, where she's an active and strong voice. Jennifer, I'm not mistaken, you were just recently elected as the Vice President of the Community College Council, is that correct? Yeah, and so she's definitely going to be a strong force with us. And without further ado, I turn it over to you, Jennifer. Go ahead. Oh, I think you're muted.
I couldn't unmute myself. I messed up. I wonder if it makes sense to take a 1-minute break for people to stand up and stretch a little bit. I know that presentation after presentation after presentation can make me a little crazy. Would that be okay, Geoff? Could I suggest?
I'd be fine with it. And I appreciate everybody's patience in this. You guys.
Why don't we give a couple of minutes for a bio break and maybe some jumping jacks or something, and then we'll come back?
Okay, we can go ahead and do that. Bill, you okay with that? All right, so it is 4:38. I'm going to how about we come back at 4:30 or 4:42? You're going to be okay with that? I'll give you 4 minutes.
You got it.
All right.
Sounds
Yes,
good. And Alyssa and
that's,
I'll do some deadlifts while we wait to return.
And Eastern time, that's 7:42, just to be clear.
Yeah. It's been kind of a, you know, packed sort of meeting here.
Seems like a lot of great information.
Yeah.
Thanks for fitting us in.
Well, yeah, and then, you know, we actually have the Zoom space for up to an hour after this, so we can continue discussion, but I certainly don't want to keep anybody late. If you guys got dinner and other activities, heaven forbid that you would have a life. So
we've already lost 14 people that were here before.
Yeah, well, we have the recording and we can always send that out.
Right.
But I think we had a much better turnout than I had expected originally, Bill.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if it makes sense for me to go ahead and share my screen and get my presentation sort of ready. Would that be
Sure.
okay with folks?
That would be great. Yeah, by the way, just a quick question. How you doing, Scott? Mr. Douglas, good. All right. Well, when I know you had to step back from your position, I was kind of a little worried about you. You know, we are in those times.
Can you tell me if that has worked? If you can see everything, Geoff? It looks okay.
Yeah, I can see everything really clearly.
Okay, great. So I'm gonna wait for you to give me the go ahead and I'll start whenever you say.
Okay.
Great.
So Bill, have you had a chance to go on vacation or take a few days off anywhere yet?
Are you kidding? We went down, we were in Houston back in the middle of May for one of my grandson's college graduation. We spent 3 days. It was great getting out of New Jersey and getting out of the house and getting away from Zoom for 3 days. That was about it.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like you probably had much time to see Houston with 3 days only.
Right. We saw a lot of barbecue joints.
Mhm. So you sample any?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Good. Okay, everyone, it's now 4:42 and we're going to get going. But just before we do, we did list the official time of the meeting ending at 5 o'clock, but we do have the Zoom space for an hour after that, and we're happy to stay on. I am going to say this though, and I'm just basically taking this as a point of privilege. Item 10, where we had talked about Campus Equity Week, I feel the meeting's getting long and we're losing people. So I'm happy to drop that particular item, and that will leave time for maybe Alyssa to go ahead and do some of her questions in addition to some of the other stuff that has to go through. But Jennifer, why don't you go ahead and get started?
Great, thank you so much, Geoff. Thank you all so much for having me here and inviting me to share the work that we've done within my local, really all together over the last 10 or so years. So I put together a little presentation just because I think just staring at me talking doesn't really show the work as well as some pictures and stuff, but I promise, well, I hope it's not boring. So before I jump into the fight for parity, I want to explain how we define parity within Peralta. Oh, I guess because this is a more general audience, I should also tell you who we are. The Peralta Federation of Teachers, we represent both full and part-time faculty within the Peralta Community College District in the beautiful East Bay, around San Francisco Bay Area. And we represent all faculty, instructors, counselors, nurses, librarians, mental health specialists, and we have a unit of about 1,000 members. So just to give you a little bit of background. So back to it. How do we define parity? So we have a side letter attached to our contract that defines full-time faculty contract hours per week. And they're defined in this way. So 15 hours of instruction, 15 hours of prep and grading, 5 office hours and 5 service hours for instructional faculty. And then non-instructional faculty, it's 30 student contact hours, 5 prep hours, and 5 hours of service. So that's like committee work and things like that. So what we did was we said, okay, let's find out what our hourly rate looks like. Let's just take the full-time faculty salary amount, divide it by 35 weeks working at 40 hours a week, and we get an hourly rate. So non-instructional faculty are paid at that hourly rate, and instructional hours are paid at twice that rate because each hour of instruction is 2 hours of work. So I'm going through this because if you look at our salary schedules ever, you're going to see these, weird numbers, and it gets a little confusing when you start wading into it. So why did we define parity that way? We did it very carefully and very thoughtfully because we wanted to have a simple line that we could really rally around and that we could really move people toward action around. And that is simply equal pay for equal work. So what we could go to the community, we could go to K through 12, we could go to, partners in labor that aren't teachers. And it was really easy for us to say, look, 2 faculty members with the same education and the same experience doing the same job are paid at different rates. And that's not fair, right? Everybody should have the same hourly rate. So we did that very early on. We first established equitable salary schedules. Equitable meaning that our full and part-time faculty have the same steps and columns. So prior to 2014, our part-time faculty members had a different salary schedule and they stopped at like step 12, whereas full-timers didn't stop until step 25. And this happens a lot. I've seen it in a lot of contracts that, you top out very early in your career, and then there's really like inequity, piles upon inequity going forward. So we renegotiated the way that our salary schedules were going to look by going ahead and we sort of took pay cuts in order to give this equitable number of steps and columns to all faculty. So once we did that, we actually moved away from parity, right? And we did it in a progressive way so that people early in their career would have more parity than people late in their career. So we did that, and then we defined parity. And by defining parity, what we mean is we went out and started talking to people about what we meant when we were talking about parity, equal pay for equal work. Then what we did was in 2017, we negotiated an agreement where we said to the district, we want a certain COLA, we want a certain amount of money across the board, but we want to distribute it. And so we gave everybody a flat raise. And then what we wanted to do was take the rest of the dollars and split them between our full and part-time faculty. What that meant was that we could start filling in those steps. We knew that in order to accomplish that, we would need full-time faculty buy-in. So we engaged in an organizing campaign where we went and talked to our full-time faculty members and asked them to sign a petition saying that they agreed with this 50-50 distribution of funds. And this is really what I think was central to the work that we did, not only then, but leading up to parity overall, because it gave us the opportunity to have one-on-one conversations with full-timers and explain the situation, and really appeal to their best selves and say, this is an injustice. We know that this is an injustice. Like, are you with us, to try and close this gap? And almost everyone we talked to signed. I only had 2 people that we talked to who didn't sign. We only talked to full-timers. There were about 350 full-timers, and we had more than 200 signatures, of people signing. So we talked to, 2/3 of our faculty, and it was pretty unanimous that people were in support. So then once we accomplished that and we signed off on that agreement, it was really phenomenal because it was one of the first contracts that were ratified without a huge argument between the full-timers and part-timers, right? It always had been like full-timers felt like the part-timers were stealing from them, and the part-timers felt like the full-timers were stealing from them. And it was just this horrible situation at every ratification. And this time we didn't have a single comment on that. People were really on board. They felt really energized. It's not true. We had a couple comments on that, but it was not a big discussion. Then we organized for a couple of years and embarked on a really exciting campaign that I'll show you some details of in just a minute. We settled on a contract that got us halfway to parity. The district told us that that the rest of the way to parity would be a really long distance. We didn't believe them. So we settled the contract with what we believed was halfway, with the understanding that we would continue to negotiate it and can leave it as a reopener. And the following fall, this is last fall, we finally closed the gap and signed off on an MOU that achieved parity. And so it's really exciting to us that we can now move on. All of our raises are across the board raises. We just signed an MOU for a 5% COLA. It's just going across the board. We don't have to worry about fights of distribution. We don't have to worry about the numbers. It's just going across the board. And now we can move on to new things. So just a few details of the way that we did this organizing and the way that we really use this as a way to build our union, build our membership, and really build real solidarity among not only full and part-time faculty, but also with staff and community members. So we did campus actions. These were actions where we went on each of our 4 campuses and we just stood there with signs, talking with people. We had flyers and we would just explain the situation. I mean, many of our students, I'm sure across the board in this room, we teach students that have no idea that they're being taught primarily by a contingent workforce. And so this was really great. This was, we did this one a month at each of the 4 campuses. We also built a lot of solidarity with some community partners. So on the left, you can see UC AFT staff and faculty, and then on the right, you see some of our CFT staff and Geoff. We also had partnerships with K through 12 in the area. So we had members from Piedmont Teachers Association, from Berkeley Unified, from Oakland Unified, and they would come to our actions and support us, and we supported them. So, and those are relationships that we still have that are really strong and really helped us. Our Central Labor Council also came and helped us to negotiate and broker deals. We also did some targeted actions to demonstrate power. So this is a picture of us at a Flex Day address by our new chancellor, where during her address, we were at this point 7 months in an expired contract for 7 months. And so we just held up signs that said fair contract now. We didn't speak, we didn't disrupt anyone, but it really did rattle the administration. They weren't used to this kind of action. And I think that it did move us towards our final agreement. We also had what we believe was a progressive approach that included all groups and gave something to all groups. So we knew that full-timers weren't going to show up at our board meetings week after week if they weren't going to get a raise, right? So we tied together parity and COLA pass-throughs for all. And so we wanted people to understand that we were fighting for part-timers specifically, but we were showing up for everyone, and that where part-timers go, we go too. right? That we were going to all stand together. The reaction was great. We ratified the contract. This is a picture on the right of, I think that's the first ballot that was submitted. And we had, just unbelievable turnout, unbelievable support. Really, the ratification vote was just a celebration. There was no controversy. People were just really excited. And, we had something like 60% of our faculty show up at something, which was remarkable. Many of them showed up time and time again. So now where are we going to go from here? We really think that we're not special, that nothing we did can't be extrapolated to others and sort of taken on by others. And so we really think that the state of California should have straight parity, and that nationally we should have parity. We also want to work on our benefits. We don't have great benefits for our part-time colleagues, and so we want to work on that. And then we also want to increase full-time faculty jobs. I mean, there's nothing that replaces, a full-time job with full benefits and job security. And so we really want to make sure that contingent labor remains for those who want to work part-time, but that it isn't the rule, it's the exception, as it used to be. And let's see, I think that is it. The end of my little presentation. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm happy to, talk with any of you about what we did. I'm happy to come to locals, and I'm happy to give this presentation at locals. I've done that a couple of times, and I think it can just be an inspiring story. So please let me know.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jennifer. And I know that Scott, you had your hand up before, so I'm going to tap you, then I want to tap Linda Sneed. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Geoff. I want to really applaud what you have accomplished. The model that you laid out, I think, is one that, to 98% degree is one that everybody has recognized as a reasonable model. And I think we've been talking about that model in various places, at least I know I have, since the early 1990s. So kudos, good job, well done.
Thank you.
I do have a couple of questions that are layered maybe a little bit. Your first slide talked about the definition. Very understandable, makes total sense to me, but it defines it on a per week basis. Was there any discussion or realization or any implication around the concept that per week here, I presume, means per week teaching? In other words, maybe 36 weeks out of the year? And what would be the implications of looking at this in terms of, are full-timers really working full-time, meaning year-round, or are they only working when they're in class? That kind of thing. Also, the parity implications, to add another layer to this, to the idea of sabbaticals, benefits, those sorts of issues that roll into it. Also, the idea of, a part-timer who teaches at 2 and 3 districts is gaining experience and should be moved along the salary schedule at a pace commensurate with that experience and not isolated only to the experience they gain at that district. And all of those things sound like I'm taking away from your accomplishment. I don't want to do that. The accomplishment is phenomenal, but I'm curious if those kinds of issues rolled into the discussion anywhere or might have a future in this overall conversation.
Certainly. Well, first, I'd like to correct you. The parity definition is not weekly, it is hourly. We define it as hourly. And so we recognize that part-time faculty are not paid for their service work, and that service work therefore is not part of the calculation. Full-timers, and it's not based on a year, it's based on a 10-month contract. It's based on 35 weeks. So we were very careful. I believe very strongly that we have achieved full parity in terms of hours directly that you're supposed to work, right? I recognize that many of us, full and part-time, do a ton of extra labor that we're not compensated for. And I think that part-timers do that even more. And so I do recognize that. Our advice to folks, to part-timers is do not do volunteer work. Do not engage in any volunteer work. And if you choose to, because it's important that we have part-time voices heard, then make sure that you make it clear that you are volunteering your time for that work, so that it's really in people's faces. We also, as an executive council, we pay our part-timers for their work because we know that they're not paid for service work, whereas full-timers do it voluntarily. So those things, that's just to correct you on that piece, or to not to correct you, but to clarify a little bit better. And with regard to the other pieces, yeah, we have a ways to go. I mean, we still have a two-tiered system and there are so many inequities. The service credit for other districts is something that is actually in our negotiations sort of priority list for this coming year, and benefits, absolutely. We need to strengthen our preference pool, right? Our part-time rehire preference. There's a lot of work to be done. Absolutely. And I think that as we all push forward, we can get more of that work done. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much. Great. Or I mean, Linda. Sorry, Linda Sneed.
Hi, Linda.
Hey, Jennifer. I would love for you to, I'll hit you up off meeting privately to see about maybe arranging something in hopefully August for a Zoom with active members of my local's part-time faculty caucus, which is, it's a union caucus, but we kind of deliberately founded it, several of us several years ago, to be, kind of inside outside. Like we're straddling, yeah, we're sort of under the auspices of the union, but we're sort of a rank and file caucus that contains union representatives in it. And I think, but I just wanted to thank you for presenting this, and thank Geoff and Bill and whoever else thought to ask you to present on this, because I think having specific case studies, and I think a lot of us, like, we know the ideas, we know the general, we know the issues, but being able to really study what worked and what didn't, and how a particular case adapted, can just make a huge difference to being able to imagine and execute something that will have results. And I think that it was really smart to appeal to full-time faculty, both in terms of their ethics, their conscience, their politics, and their self-interest. That's kind of a winning combo, and to use advancements, improvements for part-time faculty as important in and of itself, and also important in strengthening the union. And so, yeah, I just want to thank you and kind of point those out. I did have one question, which was early on, I may have missed something, but when you said you spoke to like 75% of the faculty, was that 75% of full-timers, or are full-timers 75% of your faculty at this point, because you've lost so many part-timers?
No. We still have, I just looked at the numbers from the spring. 54% of our classes are taught by part-timers. We're still about 70% part-time. The 75% of people that we talked to were full-timers, because it was a campaign to get full-timers on. But, in the background of doing all this work, I should say, we do membership drives. So we knew Janice was coming. We knew it was going to hit all of us really hard. And we sort of like ran into it. We were like, okay, bring it. I mean, we know this is coming. Like, we're not going to run away from it. And so we started doing membership drives at our colleges, meaning classroom visits at our colleges, once a month. So we would visit each college twice a year. And so we would, and we always wanted something we could talk to members about in addition to talking to non-members, because we got up to 85% members. And so it was really hard. It was like boring, so we also had that going on at the same time, where we were constantly talking. I mean, they were tired of seeing us. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I've been given the high sign by Bill. We're kind of running out of time, but I did want to go ahead and take Grace's last question. Go ahead, Grace.
Thank you, Geoff. Hey, Alyssa, I think you're amazing what you guys have been able to do. And it really is inspirational that all this commitment, as I've said to you before, comes from a full-time faculty. So on behalf of all the adjunct faculty, I am just very grateful for your commitment to social justice. And so I have two questions. One is, did your Parity also include health insurance for adjunct faculty? And then considering some of the post-COVID enrollment challenges we're facing, do you think that it is possible to achieve something like this in our future for those of us locals who are striving to be like yours?
Yeah, no, we did not get health benefits. We're hoping to sort of ride the wave of COVID and make that a priority that they can't say no to. I mean, we obviously all need healthcare, access to good healthcare. I think that we can still do it. I feel like I've been meeting some CFT leaders statewide. I think we need to do more statewide organizing. I think that right now, and national organizing, I think that we're all fighting the same battles, but we're fighting them with our administrators, and we're easy to say no to, right? But if we were all standing together, if we were all really fighting for this at a state level, I think we could do incredible things. And at least in California, we have more money now than we have ever had. I mean, it's bullshit, pardon my language, that they can't afford to pay you well. It's just nonsense. I mean, and so I think being really well versed in the budget as well is really important. You have to know the numbers better than anybody else does, so that when they say they can't afford things, you can simply throw their numbers back in their face. So I do think it's still possible. I think, you know, I think anything's possible. Almost.
Well, thank you. Maybe we can partner up in terms of, maybe we can partner up with the health insurance thing, because I mean, there is some COVID money, the HERF funds, right, that we can maybe tap into and really push for it. So your local is not getting any health insurance for adjunct faculty?
We have a 50-50 plan. I think this is the minimum you have to offer this, where if you teach 40%, you're eligible for a 50-50 deal where the district pays half and you pay half. But it's still, I mean, it's quite expensive.
Yeah, I think we have something similar, but we're at 33%. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and
I apologize.
Guys, I apologize. I'm going to have to step in because we do have a couple other people going business. Sorry, Grace, great questions. Jennifer, thank you so much, and looking forward to seeing you at least virtually when the Ledge Committee meets in the fall. Okay, thanks again. So I want to turn this over to Bill, because Bill wanted to talk about the success that we had with regard to New Jersey and unemployment insurance. Bill? Go ahead.
I'll be as brief as possible. I just want to say that after 16 years of working on November 10th of 2020, New Jersey became the third state to have some kind of unemployment protection. California through a Supreme Court decision, and Washington State through legislation. Took us 15 years. We were going back to becoming very active in 2017, when Phil Murphy was running for governor, and AFT New Jersey had a legislative conference, and Murphy was there along with other candidates to answer questions. And I got up right in his face and I said, if you are elected, will you support unemployment benefits for adjunct faculty? And we had spoken to him about it privately before, and he publicly said, yes, I will. So we held him to it. We have in our state Fed, we have an adjunct faculty issues committee, and we did get permission from the state federation to use an attorney to draft legislation. Now, I'm not going to talk about the legislation. I want to talk about the process. so that others can possibly use the same process that we used. Our legislation is not perfect. The main thing we did get was the determination of summer being a semester rather than a vacation period. If the school offers summer session or summer semesters, which just about every institute of higher education does. Our big bugaboo is reasonable assurance, but I'll get to that in a moment. And this is why we need to push AFT National to live up to their commitment to us to get the law changed on the national level. We did get a bill written. I did get an inquiry from one of the state assembly women who was thinking about putting forth a bill on her own. Her husband was adjunct faculty. She had some constituents who were adjunct faculty that had reached out to her. Nancy Merrill and I went down, met with her and her aides. And between us, we took her version, our version, we put something together. It was introduced into both houses. Got as far up coming out of committee in both state houses. All of a sudden, a letter appeared from the USDOL that said, whoa, 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 reasonable assurance, you can't change that. That wording is there. So, if you pass that, New Jersey runs the risk of losing all federal unemployment money. So the bill died. Meantime, December of 19, January of 20, we pushed for and got a concurrent resolution from both houses of New Jersey legislature titled Adjunct Faculty Bill of Rights. And it recognized, our issues. And the very last one of these stated that adjunct faculty should have access to unemployment insurance. So we worked off of that statement to go further. Then the pandemic hit, okay? We pushed the governor, reminded him of his commitment, and there was a long fight for a furlough bill with the full-time state employees, not only in higher ed, but all the full-time employees during the furlough bill. Governor Murphy lived up to his commitment, and in the bill was something that we had revised for unemployment. Got through both of the houses, went to his desk to be signed, and lo and behold, letter came from USDOL and said, we're violating the USDOL if New Jersey passes that. Long story short, we all agreed for the benefit of all the other workers in the state. They needed that furlough bill. Governor issued a conditional veto, vetoing, which he's allowed to do in our state, vetoing out our bill. And here we are in May of 2020, the middle of a pandemic with nothing. Thank God, in step AFT National. Randy Weingarten personally got involved. We had several conference calls. Randy gave us the use of Michael, if I'm pronouncing it right, Piccanelli, who's the assistant director of the legal department, who worked very closely with us. We had several calls, and what we did at his recommendation, we had calls with us, the people from AFT New Jersey who were working on this, with AFT, with the governor's office, with his aides, and with the commissioner of labor of New Jersey, Robert and Sarah and Angelo. So all groups worked together, governor's office, the legislature. We had representatives there from the Senate president and the speaker of our assembly. We had the New Jersey Labor Department, we had AFT, and we had AFT New Jersey. And we put together something that we all felt, this is why we had to give in, that would get approval from the USDOL. National, AFT National and AFT, New Jersey, and the governor's office had conferences with US Department of Labor, finally reached something that everyone could agree on. Because the first thing that AFT National said was, look, we don't want to, work on something and put something together and go through all this only to have the US DOL say, once again, no. They approved. The bill was introduced into the state Senate August 24th, the Assembly the 27th. And we began an email blitz, a phone blitz throughout the state on all our state legislators. The bill came out of committees. It was combined into one bill. And September 24th, it was passed by the state Senate 37-0 with 3 abstentions. October 29th, the Assembly passed it 68-0 to 9 not voting and 3 abstentions. Big thing was that we did not have one no vote by any of the state legislatures on this. And on November 10th, 2020, the bill was signed by Governor Murphy into law. Again, it's not the best thing. We were told by the State Department of Labor during the pandemic that they would be very lenient to us. They would overlook, whatever they can on this reasonable assurance and, not dig that deeply. And we had hundreds of adjunct faculty for the first time, even though the law wasn't, the bill, it wasn't passed into law yet. We had this commitment from the Department of Labor in New Jersey, and we had hundreds of adjunct faculty for the first time collecting unemployment during the summer. I was one of them. This year it's a lot different now. This year now they're going strictly or more strict to the law. And many of us, including myself, are in limbo right now. We're under review because they're adjudicating every individual case based on reasonable assurance, which is why, and we were told both by our state legislators, by the State Department of Labor, that the only way that we are really going to get anything done is if there's a change at the national level, and if that reasonable assurance language, which goes back to the 70s, is eliminated from the bill. So my point is, you need persistence, you need patience, and I don't have too much of that. You need passion, you need determination, you need cooperation, you need compromise. We are completely indebted and thankful to Randy and to AFT Legal Department for all the help they gave us. We could not have gotten this done without them. And their big takeaway from this is, let's get this done, and then we could use this as a model for other states. So I'm hoping that this model can be used, but again, it's not going to really work until we get that language changed on the national level.
Yeah, and I think, Bill, you made that point perfectly clear. And just so you know, for those of you who are my fellow Californiites, right now, because there are differences between federal and state guidelines, sometimes this trips people up in the application process, just in terms of the kind of screwy way that you guys get asked questions when you're applying for unemployment. Mm-hmm. And so, changing that language would be a benefit to us as well. And that's something that I think people need to understand. I'm going to go ahead here, and I don't see, does anybody have a question? Yeah, Scott, go ahead.
Thanks. Bill, you talked about using this as a model for other states. And I always thought that what we had in California, which we've had for 20 years, was a great model for other states. Was it looked at in the process at all?
Oh, in fact, that's the first place that they looked. And a lot of the language that is in our law came from the Cervisi decision, came from California. They looked at that, they looked at Washington, they looked at some other states that were trying to do it. They put everything together. And one of the justifications was that if the Cervisi decision, has been in effect all this time without the federal government, going in and saying, oh no, we have to overturn this or overrule things, that because of that, the attorneys at National said, this is what we're going to use as our model to go there. So I mean, most definitely, California was the base of what we did.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Now, we're getting a little late and I'm just looking out into the room. Is Joe Barry out there at all, or has Joe left? So is there anyone else here?
Joe never came on, so we can forget that part.
Okay. So, but did anybody want to give a COCAL report? Okay, go ahead, David.
Yeah, I've been a member of the COCAL Advisory Committee for the last 20 years. And we brought up the recent vote on the support of the new vision for higher education after attending the summit. Unfortunately, the U.S. representation on COCAL is predominantly from one group. It's from the CSU, and so it's somewhat of a limited perspective. And CSU is very supportive of the College for All and the 75-25. However, there was even during the summit, it was brought up that there was nothing in College for All for part-time faculty, and that should be addressed. So unfortunately, COCAL voted yes to support the vision, including supporting College for All as it stands with just the tuition and the 75-25. I personally voted no, because I think we want to make a point that while we do support higher education progress, we feel that contingent issues should be included wherever possible. So, and the latest update on the COCAL, this last summer's event was pushed to this summer, which is now pushed to the following summer, 2022. So hopefully we will all be in Querétaro, Mexico for COCAL 14, I believe, next summer.
Okay, thank you very much. And by the way, Leonard, I see you there. I think I almost skipped over you. By the way, I'm just going to acknowledge we're over time. And so what I'd like to do is after Leonard presents, I'd like to go ahead and formally dismiss the meeting. We can still keep recording, but then Alyssa, since you've been patient enough, we can go ahead and people can direct questions to her. But Leonard, could you go ahead, please?
Well, as treasurer and chair of the finance committee, the most important thing is to have a source of revenue to support our activities. We don't have one at the moment. The initial plan was to have individual members pay for membership. That was removed by the board. Nothing was put in place. At the current time, the finance committee had a meeting. We're looking at options of what we think is best. Our focal point is to copy different organizations, say looking at other caucuses. You may belong to some. As an example, the Progressive Caucus, the Black Caucus, the Latinx Caucus, all charge individual members. On the other hand, there are several caucuses that now are charging locals or chapters of locals to be members. And that is the proposal where our committee has been evaluating. Having said that, I'm totally open still to other ideas and thoughts about a sustained form of development of funds so that we can go to the AFT National Convention. We can afford to have a table set up and other information and reception. It's not free. We're a caucus. AFT doesn't pay for any of this, and it must be understood. But we have to develop a system that continually works. It can't be occasional gift or occasional things. And a GoFundMe is definitely not a focused way to develop a regular format to fund our caucus. We need a formula. I'm going to encourage anybody and everybody who wants to can send me an email. If you have thoughts and ideas and would like to talk with me about it, I will simply put in my email so that you can contact me. And even if we need to have a Zoom conversation, that can be arranged too. But as I said, the most important thing is at the moment in our bank account, we have $1,119.40. And I certainly hope we can find a method that's fair and positive in a sense that people understand what the money is for and how it will be spent. I know we're tight on time, so rather than have answer any questions now, please direct questions to me through my email, which I just put up. And I'll respond to you. And if you'd like a conversation, let me know. As I said, by telephone or by a Zoom chat, I can arrange either one. If you have thoughts and ideas that you would like to input in the development of what I call a regular and consistent revenue stream for the caucus. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leonard. And I just want to thank everybody here as a participant. One of the things I do want to throw out here is that Leonard basically chairs up the Finance Committee. And one of the things that is a part of the caucus that you don't have to be an exec member for, and that we're certainly looking for, is for people to serve on various committees. We have membership committee, organizing committee. We had just recently a planning committee for this meeting, a bylaws committee. I think one of the things I'm going to do probably in the next day or two is put out a call again for people to actually join or take part on those committees. We welcome your involvement. I also want to let everybody know that in the next year, we're going to be, when National Convention comes around, prior to that, we have basically all the offices up for election again. And one of the things that I think is very important, and I'm certainly happy with, the people that we have on our executive committee now, it's always nice to see new people, new faces come in. I think one of the things that makes a caucus successful is if there is a constant infusion. And certainly we would welcome that. And I'm hoping that some of you will take interest. And also, even if you're just interested as casual from afar, we'd welcome you to direct to join the caucus if you haven't already done so, or to ask others to join the caucus, because certainly strength comes in numbers. And with that said, I'm going to go ahead and stop. There's stuff that we certainly could probably address, and certainly with exec, I'd like to talk about the idea of setting up another general meeting, maybe in a couple of months' time. But for now, I'm gonna be quiet, and if you guys have any questions, please direct them to Alyssa. Thank you all. So none of you have any questions for Alyssa?
Alyssa, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
No?
You can unmute yourself?
Let me.
Oh my.
Wait a minute.
Well, gosh.
There we go. Okay.
Oh, great. So Harry, go ahead.
Wait a minute. I have to reset this. Okay.
Okay. So I think Harry Bernstein had a question.
Harry, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Okay, I just did. Thank you. So is this an appropriate forum to bring up a question about getting rid of the WEP GPO for
It is. I think if my colleague Ed is still able to hear this conversation, it may be an issue on which he's going to be a better question answerer than I will, because he knows the history of our activity around it better than I do. And before he goes ahead and does that, I'll just add, since I'm mindful of the time, my email address is also in the chat. If folks have ideas or thoughts or questions they want to raise afterwards, I'm also very happy to hear from folks via email. If we're heading toward a logical conclusion to the meeting soon after this.
Can I add to his question in terms of the larger issues of many K through 12 and higher ed districts that don't have any access to Social Security? And so then maybe you can address both of those Social Security conundrums.
I can take a shot at that one, David. I hope you guys can hear me still. The WEP GPO issue is much simpler. This is another one of those, we've been talking a lot tonight about 14-year struggles and the like. This is another one of those struggles. And there's legislation in the Senate. Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski and I think Senator Cassidy are the Republican co-sponsors of it. And there are multiple Democratic co-sponsors, including Sherrod Brown. And we have been moving towards WEP GPO elimination slowly but surely for some time. I do the state policy work at AFT, and I do a work on this because it's a place where federal and state laws come together, basically, because this is about policy for workers that states and localities have chosen to leave out of Social Security, and how to.
Could you explain for those in New Jersey that don't know what you're talking about?
All right. So when we created Social Security, we didn't make it universal from the beginning. And one of the things that we did was we allowed state and local governments to choose not to participate in the system. And many state and local governments chose not to do it. So in California, in Ohio, in Louisiana, in Texas, and in various other places, there are several million, I believe, public sector workers who are not covered by Social Security, and as part of their public sector work. And what happens is that the Social Security Administration penalizes their other Social Security benefits that they earn through other covered work in the private sector or institutions in other states where they participated in Social Security. And the government pension offset is GPO, and suddenly the acronym for WEP has escaped my mind. But getting rid of those penalties on your other Social Security earnings has been a policy priority of ours for some time, and we're making slow progress on it, but there is progress. The broader question about why it is that the government pension office, thank you, Harry, that's exactly right. And thank you, Jory, that's also very helpful. There are acronym explanations in the chat. And the broader question about public sector participation in Social Security and whether or not it makes sense to just require that everyone participate in Social Security is a more complicated public policy question that the AFT has not come to a formal policy position on. And I can offer some speculation as to why that might be, but I think that there are the interplay in a lot of cases between the Social Security tax that employers would have to pay versus what that impact would be on a public sector pension that has been set up. And this is a tough one for, I think, contingent faculty who don't necessarily have access to those systems. But for full-time workers, the investment that goes into the pension fund would basically end up being added to the Social Security tax for the employer, and there would be a collision there. And I think that becomes, for a lot of workers, who are in this uncovered position, it becomes a do I choose getting Social Security or keeping my pension debate that they believe would be foisted on them as part of that. And I think that this is more complicated politically on the question of how to get people to participate in Social Security and how to get state and local governments to move towards being in it. I think that if we created the system from scratch, universal participation would be something that everyone would, in hindsight, be like, of course we should do that. But getting to universal participation isn't something that we have a position on right now, and I suspect that it would be divisive trying to create one. But there is an upcoming AFT convention, so that's the final thought that I want to share on that.
Ed, I can just tell you that I wrote the resolution that was passed by Texas AFT at their convention, so it is now the official policy of Texas AFT. Is it? So as of our last convention. So I'm hoping that Texas will take it to the national. I can't say that they will, but it was passed.
So David, I am unfamiliar with that resolution, but I would dearly like to see it just for my own edification.
Yeah, I'm glad to send it to you.
My email is
Your
in the
thing is in the
chat.
chat somewhere?
Yep.
There it is, okay. I'll dig it out for you. But we, we made it our, policy for whatever it's worth. And I've spoken several times to Congressman Doggett who was my congressman on the Ways and Means Committee. I'm not quite sure he's listening, but I keep reminding, very high ranking, I think he's third on Ways and Means.
It is something that would help stabilize the finances of Social Security overall, to the extent that that is still a policy question that people have concerns about.
I mean, the craziest part to me is that everybody thinks it is universal.
Mm-hmm.
Probably many of the people on this call, 99% of Americans, if they were asked, is Social Security a universal entitlement, would say yes, because they've literally never heard of anybody, other than maybe an undocumented immigrant or something that doesn't pay into Social Security.
Yeah.
So, and if it's invisible, that means it's hard to fix.
I think Harry had another question, follow-up question.
Yes, I never got to the question. Okay, but that was all useful. Thank you. So I wrote a resolution for the CFT this year. It just supported basically what the California Federation of Teachers was already in line to ask for the removal of WEP and GPO. I didn't know until recently that the Ways and Means Subcommittee on Social Security, with John Larson, the chair, had a hearing on the 15th of June where they had 4 members of the public who had various stories about how these provisions had affected them. He made a point that there hadn't been much of a change in 50 years, and it was up to that subcommittee to act. That sounded like a stirring call for change. Then David Milroy informed a number of us that they were further asking for individual stories. I don't know if this went beyond California. Individual stories further detailing how one was going to be affected by these provisions, which I and many people submitted. And I contacted John Larson's office, said, is there anything coming up? He just said, look at their website. That's like watching paint dry. Maybe something that happened, maybe not. I informed his office and reminded him that Obama, when he came in 2009, had as part of his agenda to get rid of WEP and GPO. And they said that might be useful because, at least in principle, Biden has some affiliation for what Obama's programs were, and he actually supports this, but it just seems to be such a low priority. So I wonder what we can do, what we as faculty can do to push the measure even further. In other words, if they're on the brink, how can we tip that balance? Because I think it's one of the few areas that there could be a bipartisan action. One of the problems being that it does not affect every state. So the reason that there is a couple, 100 or 200 representatives that maybe are not advocating it is their people are not involved. So any thoughts?
I don't
So,
see. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, it's okay. So I actually suspect that you as a group might benefit from a presentation from our federal legislation department, who I know is actually engaged in working on advancing this legislation, because they can give you more detail about both its status and about what might happen to help than I can at the moment. My role, like in it, involved at the beginning of that process explaining it to our federal lobbyists more than understanding where the bill is now. So the closer you get to that, the more you want to bring them into the discussion.
How can we do that? How does that happen?
I think that that we can work with Geoff and Bill to make that happen at a subsequent meeting.
We'd be glad to make it happen.
It sounds exciting. I did also want to mention, since it isn't common knowledge, there's a public, I guess, a policy division, I forget what it's called, of our CalSTRS, which is the state retirement organization, and they have come out in favor of abolishing the two provisions. Their policy apparently is that when something actually happens, in other words, if there is legislation that's forthcoming, then they will announce it to the public. So even though there are thousands of their members who are being affected right now, they don't speak unless they have something to show. But the fact that they are discussing it, their, I guess, legislative analysis, even so, showed that there was a lot of controversy, a lot of cost for, it's not a neutral matter to eliminate those provisions. But they came out for it anyway, even with those facts. So just wanted to bring that out.
Okay. Thank you very much. We're going to take one last question. And again, Ed and Alyssa, thanks so much for hanging in there. Thank you, everybody else. I'm looking at Alyssa's screen and very clearly day has turned to night. And so we do need to kind of move on, but Scott, go ahead.
Well, I could talk about weapon GPO, but actually I want to wrap back around to Alyssa. I'm remembering correctly, one of the comments you made, which sounded very promising, was the concept of organizing across multiple campuses to target issues of mutual concern and interest. Am I remembering that correctly?
I think you are remembering partly some of what Aimee said in her presentation on Scholars for a New Deal, but it is very aligned with both how we at AFT want to support our affiliates in working on stuff and how we have affiliates working on stuff. So I think although she said it, I will happily second it.
So the observation I'm making, or would like to make, is the idea that, we should think about pushing this beyond multiple campuses and push it, AFT, NEA, and others out there, labor in general. I mean, the concept, for example, of equal pay for equal work is a very popular idea. We have fair labor, we have bills in California, we have all of this stuff, and it impacts adjuncts tremendously and many other people in all kinds of business. Why aren't we looking to form better alliances around these movements across multiple layers of labor? We as academics, it feels like we often get into this little bubble, and we don't want to think of ourselves as labor in general, which of course we are. And we want to have our little fights amongst ourselves as academics with union, with districts. We need to fight for these ideas across a much larger platform. That's my comment. Take it for what it's worth.
Yeah. Oh, no, I agree with you. And I mean, I think I would dispute the characterization that we're not trying to do it. I think it is the case that the barriers to doing it are formidable, and it takes a lot of work to get over them, and a lot of work that when you are moving the campaigns that you are moving on individual campuses, or when we are moving the federal priorities that we have described to you tonight, to try to make sure that they're kind of salient and at the top of the discussion. At some point, the question of how do we, this is what the AFL-CIO is supposed to exist for, right? And it's always been a somewhat fraught tool historically for achieving that kind of labor unity. The only other thing that I'd highlight for you around our experience in higher ed specifically, because I think it's going to be a really important thing to have on our horizon and thinking about the New Deal for higher ed concepts, is that there are, there are recognized stakeholders who show up to be talked to and to talk about higher education. And one of the most important ones to federal legislators right now are the interest groups that represent the institutions themselves. They have their own, I'm not going to call them unions, right? But like the American Council on Education, the American Association of State Colleges and Universities, the Community College Organization, they all show up to talk about the same topics that we are talking to these legislators about. And there are some ways that our interests are not aligned with theirs and aren't going to be. There are other ways in the course of this campaign that I think we're going to have to start to think about what kind of strategic alliances we can make with them in order to get some things done that we might not be able to otherwise. So when I think about it, I don't just think about the perennial problem of how do we unite across different kinds of labor, but also like within the world of higher education, how do we bring all this cacophony of voices into something closer to like singing out of an organized piece of music? It's going to be a big uphill.
Alyssa, as a way of closing, and I was wondering if you could maybe link that to the question I asked earlier that kind of got cut off about the style or the of politics between sort of ideological and pragmatic politics, because I'm hearing both on this call.
Yeah.
And I feel like it doesn't sound like we have a cohesive theory of the case, a cohesive argument as to do we want it all, or are we going to really try to work with an administration?
Right. This is a great question.
I mean, you could simplify it to the Clinton-Sanders thing, but that's a little bit too simplified, but it's,
So I think it is my view as an organizer, as a trade unionist, that maintaining the pole of we want it all is a vital part of what we have to do. I have over many years have talked and learned from Joe Barry about the inside-outside campaign concept. I think that's not just about the campaigns that we run on our institutions. That's also about the campaigns that you run on your unions. And it's true as well about the campaigns that we run on the federal government, right? Sometimes one part of us has to be representing the strong ideological pole, and another part of us, maybe not one that's easily connected via an obvious paper trail, is sitting at the table negotiating something that seems more reasonable. And that's a tricky thing to do, because when those parts are not well coordinated, there can be tremendous mistrust between the people who are executing those parts. I mean, look at the level of animosity that it is possible to develop between Clinton and Sanders supporters even now in discussing those different approaches to, how do you make government work better for people?
Or even the two infrastructure bills.
Right, correct. And so, they exist in creative tension with each other. You're right to say that there's not a resolution. I think a thing that characterizes the elected leaders of AFT nationally is that they are constantly thinking about how to play in the space that's created by those polls. And to give you, just give you an example of one place where there has been tremendous movement made possible, some of it by us, but not all of it by us, is on debt cancellation, right? So 5, 6, 7 years ago, when Strike Debt put together the first movement to get people to say they're not going to pay their student loans, that was a time at which the idea that student loan debt was going to be canceled seemed laughable. First they ignore us, then they mock us, then they fight us, then we win. We're in the fight us stage now on that. And we are there partly because the work of people like Strike Debt, the work of some of our affiliates and their leaders with their elected leaders help to kind of set where is the far pole of that. And there's other, there's these middle ground positions, like, what the president said when he was running for office, which is I'll forgive 10,000 plus 50,000 for people who are educators. And, 100,000 if you went to an HBCU. It was a very complicated platform. But he was made to say a lot of stuff that he didn't really want to say in the first place because this discourse existed and there was no option but to engage with it. And so what I see as the strategic opportunity for all of us, not just on adjunct and contingent issues, but on higher education generally, is we have to create a discourse that there is no choice but to engage with. And that's going to mean allies from within labor. It's going to mean allies from within the institutional representative community. It's going to mean allies from among students and families and people who pay into the system. It's going to take a long time, but it's going to be exciting. And when we get there, it's going to be a big win.
Thank you. That's a more sophisticated answer than I've heard to that question before.
Good.
A lot of times it's the type of thing that
we are pragmatists. If you would prefer
a lot of times it
the
gets
idealist, pick the other guys.
it gets swept into a dichotomy. And so what you're talking about is one is pushing the agenda. Hopefully one is pushing the agenda while the other is trying to nail down the gains as you move the ball forward, as you're suggesting. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But yeah, and I appreciate what you're getting at, and that certainly applies to a lot of the issues. At healthcare, for example, is an obvious one, and so many others. So
Well,
I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, David. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you for sticking around. I mean, we're like the Avengers Endgame movie here. We're up at like about 2 hours and 50 minutes. So onward and upward. And thank you all. And take care. Have a good night.
Yeah, I'd like to just give a
Oh, yeah,
special
go ahead.
thank you to Alyssa and Ed for hanging
Yes,
in all this time. Shows the commitment that AFT does finally have to our caucus, and I really appreciate it in speaking for the entire board. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
We leave you to your evening. Thank you all. Good night.